yeah, this is first episode of the Goats and Unicorns podcast. So excited.
All righty. So let's jump right into it. So personal development, that's the topic of today, pretty much finding content and learning to establish the content and actually put it into play.
Yeah.
Maybe let's get a little bit started with like your story or something. When did you really like start to get, because it's honestly an addiction for me, that feeling of growth. If you're not growing, it messes with you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, my story as far as personal development goes is I got into Jim Rohn. So if you know a lot about personal development, you probably know who that is. He's passed away, but he was one of Tony Robbins' original mentors. And that was like what got Tony into, the space and everything. And so it was actually weird because when I was a kid, like I literally still remember this to this day. Like when I was in second grade, I remember I was a really good reader. Like I was known as one of the best readers in the class. And then I think we went on like a spring break or something, and I didn't read at all. I was like reading every night before that. And then on spring break, I didn't really do anything school wise. And when I got back, like I noticed that my reading skills had like just diminished a little bit because of that practice, right? And then I remember my teacher saying something to me. I can't even remember what it was, but all I know is that the effect it had on me as a kid was that like I just started telling myself that, oh, like I'm not a good reader anymore. Really weird. And so I actually kind of had this deterrent about reading or like this weird thought process as far as like that I'm not a good reader, so I just shouldn't spend any time reading any books. And then when I was in college and I was, paying for college and everything, I went to a few semesters and I started realizing, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this whole plan that I had for my life of like going to college and everything, it's just like, it's such a drag, really difficult for me. And so that was actually when I first started reading for myself and not really for because somebody told me to and it was on some rubric, right? And so that was the first book was actually an audiobook that I listened to, and I think they were just, I don't know if the actual physical book exists. I don't believe it does. I think they're just a cassette thing, like a cassette tapes from Jim Rohn that was then uploaded as a book onto Audible. And that was my first exposure to it. And I listened to that book over and over and over again. It's called The Art of Exceptional Living. And I think what grabbed me was that it wasn't just like a business book. It wasn't just like a finance book or a real estate book or whatever, that sort of thing. And it wasn't just like this woohoo rah stuff. It was basically like teachings from this man's life of just a way to live an exceptional life, right? Like the art of living an exceptional life. And I was like, man, this is cool. That's really the desire that I've always had, and I think everybody really has, is just we want to live an amazing life. Like we want to have the freedom to live an amazing life. We don't want life to act upon us. We want to act upon life. And so that's what really got me into it. And as they say, the rest is history, but it has not been the sort of thing. And for anybody watching this, like personal development is an ongoing process throughout your whole life. Like you really should never stop. And you also shouldn't expect, in my opinion, to get results right away. Like there are certain tweaks that you can make that will get your life moving in a right direction, but you're not going to just all of a sudden wake up a millionaire the day after you read your first personal development book, right? It can happen. It can happen faster for some people than others, but ultimately I've seen a lot of people just try a little bit, get some momentum, and then they kind of give up. And I've even experienced that too. I've gone through waves of consistency, right? And now I feel like I've got it down to the point where it's just like I don't ever miss a day of developing myself or refining my skill set in some way, shape, or form. So that's kind of the 30,000 foot overview of that whole concept. And as you know, Caleb, one of the books that I will write here in the near future, I'm writing one right now that's a little bit more niche relevant for the business model that you and I both do. But the other one that I'm writing is going to be called the Unicorn Equation, which is kind of a play on what our brand is. And that is basically this series of, I don't know what you really want to call it, like this sequence of events or milestones or things that I've seen the most successful people in the world and the most successful companies in the world kind of adopt as a defining foundation for them. And it's just stuff I've learned just from studying this stuff, right? So I've been able to draw my own little learning from, you know, trying to learn from these personal development people. And so, and as you know, the second step of what I call the unicorn equation is to always be, like you mentioned at the beginning, consuming some sort of content, whether that's written form in books or blogs, whether it's audio with audiobooks and podcasts like this, or whether it's video, things like YouTube, online courses, and those sorts of things. And so it's always be consuming some sort of content, but then the second and most crucial part of that is the creating portion, creating and implementing what you learned, right? Because you know, that there's that saying that says like, oh, knowledge is power, but that's not, knowledge isn't worth a dang thing if you don't do anything with it, right? And so that's kind of now this whole unicorn equation thing that I call it. It's just kind of my own phraseology, right? Is what I live my everyday life off of.
No, yeah, absolutely. Just a constant, because there's another saying. I don't know who originated this, but it's like it's a universal fact. What you consume is what you become. So you actually have the conscious decision to choose what are you consuming in every moment. And
Yeah.
there's even another very powerful thing that I try to share with some of my closer family members, even if they're
Mhm.
not blood, is that
Right.
these things called mirror neurons. That if you put yourself around people, whether you're consciously aware of it or not, you will become like them. And I'm pretty sure, I forgot his name, but pretty big financial guy. And he has a saying that's like, show me your friends and I'll show you your future.
Yeah.
So that's just something to really bear into mind. Your brain is constantly absorbing information and mirroring your surroundings. That's just the way evolution is. You're
Yeah.
too different from, your herd, you're most likely not going to survive. They're going to see you as an outcast. So it's just naturally implemented into our brains.
Yeah. Man, that is so powerful that you bring that up about those mirror neurons, because in the book that I'm writing, the unicorn equation, as I expound deeper into this stuff, is I make some suggestions of, in my opinion, what are the most important things to study, right? We for those who have a college degree, and again, I'm a college dropout, right? And for a lot of people, college is not the way for them to make a living anymore, right? Like, I can learn just as much from YouTube, I feel like these days, as I can at a university, right? And um with that being said, I make some suggestions on what the most important thing, and one of those things is the brain, and learning about not just the brain, but really like our bodies in general, because there's obviously a health aspect that a lot of the people that I've studied are make a huge point to develop their health, right? Because it's so important. Like, there's that Indian proverb that you've probably heard, right? Where it's like, what is it? The healthy man has a million wishes, but the unhealthy man has but one wish, right? And that unhealthy man, his wish is to be healthy, right? And so, like, it's so important, because what's the point of, a lot of the stuff that we talk about with financial freedom and building wealth and having impact in the world, if we're not going to live to see the day where we can do it, right? And obviously we can leave a legacy behind, but we obviously want to be around, at least I do, as long as I can on this earth, and so studying the brain and learning about something like mirror neurons, right, or your reticular activating system and different things in your brain, how much more of an edge does that give you, right, to be able to then, whatever you want to call it, hack or just make consistent tweaks and changes to the way that you're living your life. I mean, you can literally, from learning about the brain and how it works, you can essentially hack your way to success. And that's the
Oh,
coolest thing. That's the coolest thing because, you just, all you're doing is tapping into and learning about what's already there, what you've already been given, and then utilizing that with that information to make, like, I don't know, I call it data driven decisions, right? Where it's like, okay, this is the way that my brain works, right? And so therefore, if I just do this, then I can have a different outcome than what I've been having, that I
absolutely.
want to change, right? Or whatever. So the brain, one of the biggest things, psychology, those sorts of things, human behavior, I think those are the top things that anybody could study about, because of what then it can lead to in the later portions of the unicorn equation, which we'll probably talk about on another episode.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Like I've heard in countless books, and what I've also experienced for myself is like, you can learn knowledge, but the fundamental engine that's driving you in that direction of your personal success is simply your conscious awareness of where you are right now and what today is going to do for tomorrow.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
like when I first started off in school, the weird thing is we used to have these tests back in like third grade or something, and it
Yeah.
was kind of like an IQ test in a way. I
Yeah.
actually scored kind of low, which is the weird thing. And like just to speak from other people's words, I usually don't, you know, talk about myself this way, but from what other people have told me is I'm relatively intelligent. So it's just kind of interesting,
Right.
that I was, like from the get go, I was kind of naturally expected to not be the brightest, but I still did well in certain things. Like
Yeah.
certain things I'm not the best at, like this tech stuff. This stuff took me some focus
Right.
to know pretty much what's going on.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's an interesting thing. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it goes along really well with what we're talking about. And that is that, and I'm sure you can attest to this, is that, and how I mentioned about the story when I was a young kid, and I was like, my teacher just saying that thing about like, oh, Zach, like you haven't been keeping up on your reading, right? And how you were saying there were certain things, that IQ test right there, like, as an underdeveloped brain as a child, right? We 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 tell ourselves these stories the rest of our lives. That's what, a guy that you and I are both a fan of, Chris Crone, he talks about limiting beliefs, right? And how, Chris is this extremely wealthy guy, and his degree that he got in college was on family, and like, what is it, families, marriage and family studies. That was his degree. And so, and it's crazy that by studying that degree and learning the development of, a child and what happens, and everything, like, I mean, I think he just really took that because he wanted to be a good parent. But what it's blossomed into is these massive businesses and a real estate portfolio and everything, because he was able to see, oh my gosh, like, early on in someone's life, like, we can be molded and literally set up for either like success or failure, or just down a certain path that it's going to be tough to unravel from, like unwind and then go down the right path, right? As a kid. And that's what happens to a lot of people. And for, you and I, and the impact that we want to have on the world, like, that's what we are battling. And you and I have each gone through our own battles, like you just said. So, like, getting that label of like, oh, you scored low on the IQ test, or Zach getting told by his teacher, my teacher had no, I can't even remember who my teacher was, right? I don't even know if I could remember her name, but I just know that there was, and I don't even know what she said, but there was some sort of comment that she made that I knew internally, that from then on, I told myself, I'm not good at reading. I'm not a good reader. Right. And that teacher had no intention of making that sort of impact. She didn't do it maliciously or anything. It was probably, her way of trying to motivate me to get back on the train. But what it did to my underdeveloped brain was it just sent me down this path of like, oh, I'm not a good reader, I don't read books, right? And then it kind of evolved into the sort of thing where, like, I would take pride in the fact that I don't read books, which is so backwards, right?
Yeah.
In high school, I would take pride in like, okay, how little of the book, if I'm doing a book report, can I read and still get away with getting a good grade? Because I still wanted to get good
Oh,
grades,
oh,
obviously.
that's efficiency, man. That's just efficiency. I mean, like, I feel like that's one thing about school. I'm not against education whatsoever. I'm surrounded by like 50 books.
Right.
School destroys creativity. I feel like everybody there, whether they are scoring A's or scoring F's, they have some type of sense that this isn't really beneficial.
Yeah.
And it's really reinforced when you ask the teachers, when am I ever going to use this? Do you use this? And they tell you no. And they're
Yeah.
honest about it.
Right, exactly. And it's yeah, you're exactly right. It's crazy. And yeah, it's just so interesting how, you know, we really as adults, right, like as our brains are fully developed, right, like we then have to really do a lot of work on ourselves in this personal development stuff. And if anybody's like watching this that isn't on the personal development or self-development train, like you're not proving to anybody, like I wasn't proving to anybody by taking pride in the fact that I'm not a reader. You're not proving to anybody that you're right. All you're doing is making an excuse to or whatever to make yourself feel better, right? But at the end of the day, if you felt what it felt like to level up and develop yourself and you know, look back at the end of your life and be like, oh man, I totally maxed out my potential. Like that's what the whole goats and unicorns thing is about. For anybody listening to this that literally is only listening to it because of the name and it just sounds so weird that you had to find out what it was about, is like what our whole movement is about with goats and unicorns is that we study the goats, which I would consider, you know, the individuals, the greatest of all time in business and sports, philanthropy, in religion, whatever it is, right? And we model what they've done to achieve whatever it is that they've achieved. We pick people that have achieved or are where we want to go, and then we do that. And the unicorns, just for people that know where that comes in, is I've spent the last 4 or 5 years involved in a pretty small capacity, but it's a little bit of a capacity nonetheless, with a venture capital firm investing into startup companies. And what a startup valued at $1 billion is a unicorn. And so I feel like if a startup reaches $1 billion valuation, they probably know what they're doing, right? Whether it's in product development, sales, marketing, combination of two or three, whatever, like whatever it is, they've got something going on that we can learn from if we're trying to build our dream business or businesses or whatever. And so that's, you know, where that whole theme comes in, right? And that's what personal development is all about, is like, okay, you know, these people are ahead of me in some way, shape, or form. They must be doing something right. Most of them are doing something right. Some of them got lucky, but those people that got lucky are the extreme anomaly. But more than
Absolutely.
but the majority, and I would say 99% of people who have achieved something of greatness have done it deliberately, and they didn't just all of a sudden wake up one day and they're like, oh my gosh, like I'm all of a sudden successful. I wasn't even trying for this, right? Like nobody's really, that doesn't really happen to people, you know?
Yeah. Not to get, religious or anything, but something Robert Kiyosaki talks about, because he says he was in Sunday school growing up all the time, is he was asked one time when he's at Sunday school, like, what made the three wise men wise and
Uh-huh.
how they were so successful, in the
Yeah.
eyes of everybody, is that they constantly searched for teachers. They were
Yeah.
always humbling themselves to, pretty much mentally admit that maybe they don't know everything.
Yeah.
And I think knowing everything and kind of that entitlement that I have no responsibility for where I am right now is the most damaging thing you can do for growth. And like,
Absolutely.
like I could deal with rude people all day, but people who like have zero responsibility, those people I just cannot be around because they're so hard to help. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I think the true like beginning, if you like, you could start anywhere. We all start at level zero. Some people are naturally more talented and can pick up on certain things, but regardless, we all start from the beginning of learning step zero. So I think just like, humbling yourself to listen to somebody else and not talk the entire time and just really, I think truly the best thing you could do is hear everybody out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Even the people that are
Absolutely.
extremely controversial, someone usually has a bit, kind of like what we're talking about with Chris Crone, how he learned some knowledge about childhood and marriage and was able to learn how the human condition works and applied it to business.
Right.
Sometimes you can find little key bits of knowledge within people who can be extremely controversial that is complementary to the knowledge you've been learning.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Absolutely. And the interesting thing about like controversy is that that's the sometimes the reason why people do that and try to add a little bit of spice and controversy into their messaging of whatever it is that they're trying to teach is because we as humans, there's another thing you learn by studying human behavior is like we don't really pay attention to a lot of like the middle ground, that kind of that just normalcy. Like we pay attention to extremes, right? So like what's the news filled with? Extremely negative stuff, right? What's the most viral content online with TikToks and YouTubes and everything? It's positive content. Like people think it's the negative stuff, but actually on social media it's the positive stuff because people want to feel that extreme happiness and joy that comes from whatever the message is. And so that's why it goes viral, right? You want to share and spread that happiness. And so that's what's interesting about learning from those controversial people is sometimes you actually look at them and they're not as controversial. And that's where when you realize that, that's when, like, let's say somebody was super controversial against something that you believe, and you just decided to just not listen to that person at all because their views didn't line up with yours. Well, chances are that the reason why they've crafted their message in that way is because they're trying to get people just like you viewing them, right, to listen to their message, right? And that's why they stand for things that are, and obviously there's extremes, and that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the people that, like you said, controversial. They're not in the middle, but they're not on the extreme either. But when you actually dive in and study them, I can't tell you how many times this has happened with me. And it's so weird that this is a thing. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I have literally, there's been like people that I've learned a ton from now, where at the beginning of my personal development journey, I was totally judgmental towards them. And I was like, I don't think that guy knows what he's talking about, or I don't think that girl is right, or whatever. And it was like so stupid of me. And then something, and I don't know why, or I guess I could probably spend some time dissecting it, but save that for another time. But now I look back and I'm like, I can't believe I ever wrote this guy off, right? An example of that is one of the books I shared with you, The Entrepreneur Roller Coaster by Darren Hardy. That was my most read book last year. And I used to, when I first heard of Darren Hardy, it was because of he would do these things called Darren Daily, where if you signed up for him, for his like newsletter or whatever, he would send you a video to your email, and he still does. That's his newsletter essentially, is just these little like motivational type clips. And for some reason I got like bothered. Like some of them were good, but then after a while, but like getting those emails every single day to my inbox, it was just like, it got to be really overwhelming. And then there was a few of the messages I didn't agree with, and then I just completely wrote him off as like, I don't think Darren Hardy knows what he's talking about. And then I just, gave him another chance years later. I mean, we're talking years later, and listened to that Entrepreneur Roller Coaster book. And I was like, this is literally the best book on business I've ever listened to. This is literally like the manual for how to become an entrepreneur, right? Which, as I riddle that throughout all of the stuff that I now teach, right? And, whether it's a course or books that I'm writing or whatever, I whittle a lot of that into it because it's so good. And it's just so weird how, we make these little assumptions. It's really interesting when you start unpacking like your experiences and your own behavior, and then you start seeing it in others. And that's another really cool thing about, this whole, consume and create is learning the dichotomy of how humans work and behave and all that kind of stuff. And then using that to your advantage, not to manipulate people or anything like that, but using it to strike business partnerships and network with the right people, get in the right circles, as you talked about earlier, like show me your friends and I'll show you your future, right? You can use those things that you learn to up level any area of your life, really. So it's just cool. It's a really cool thing, as you and I have riffed on for hours before.
Absolutely, man. And it's just, I'm very, very grateful to be where I am now, because I just started with one book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. Before that, I was being told to go to college, and I did not want to go to college. Like, I was doing great in school in high school. I was actually killing it. I thought it was easy. Um, but I did not want to go to college because I remember sitting down one time in class, and I actually just seen this one kid who was calling the teacher out, and he wasn't necessarily that kind about it, but he
Yeah.
had a fair, very controversial, like we were talking about, not
Yeah.
necessarily most correct, but he still
Right.
had a point. And she sent him out of class. And I remember like sitting there and I was doing everything I was told, and it was easy, but like I still had no choice. And it just totally hit me so hard. And I'm not going to say this is truth, but it definitely resonates more and more the more I learned about it, is that school is so much like a filter system for those who are going to do every single thing they are told and those who rebel.
Yep.
And it just right then and there, I was like, oh my gosh, I used to want to go to college. I was actually thinking of like aerospace and
Oh,
stuff
cool.
like that. I'm really into math. I love math. I was in like
Yeah.
calculus. But
Yeah. That's awesome.
but yeah, I don't know. It totally just dawned on me, and it was stressed me out so much because I did not want to go to college. I didn't know anything about finances at the time. My family doesn't know anything about finances.
Right. Right.
So just no background. And I remember ended up coming across Rich Dad Poor Dad, and it was very humble beginnings, just like
Yeah.
even like to reread it now, I'm like, okay, that's a good introduction, but it's nothing crazy. And it's just really bizarre how I was able to stick with it it's been like 2.5 years of me studying finances pretty religiously. And now I'm here. The people I'm able to surround myself with, it's just really crazy how much a little seed of like, okay, I think this is a thing for me, can just flower into something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
lots of criticism the entire time. I get really excited when I learn first things, and it can be very
Yeah.
overwhelming. And
Right.
I remember when I was like, I'm gonna be wealthy, I'm gonna freaking invest in real estate. And I would tell all my coworkers at all the jobs I worked at, and they're like, oh yeah, what about this and that? And the criticism, I remember they would like have points of like, how are you gonna do this? How does this work? And it would literally shut me down for like a day or two.
Yeah.
But that freaking pain drove me to literally find the answer to like, I was in like, what's it called, cognitive dissonance or something, where it's like what I thought was legit, and then all of a sudden there's like some space in between it. That stuff is very powerful because I
Yeah.
could need to go find the answer to their criticism, and I wasn't necessarily proving them wrong, but just for my own personal belief.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, actually pretty much 100% of the time, any of those hard questions that I didn't ask myself, I found the answer for. And it only got the ball spinning even faster and faster. And
Dude.
I'm not here to prove them wrong, but like criticism, you got to really learn to love criticism, because oftentimes it's just really good questions you have not asked yourself yet.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Man, so much value in literally what you just said. Because and the funny thing is that in the the title of what's going to be the chapter of the book, or step 2 of the unicorn equation, which is always be consuming and creating, that's why I talk about the creating portion being so important, is because at one point in my life, and I think when you're first starting out, it might be, I don't know, I don't know, like, if I could go back and do it again. I mean, I guess I would do it differently. I would spend more time implementing and creating than I did just learning, because I spent a lot of time just being kind of, what some people call an information junkie, where, I was going to seminars and buying all sorts of courses and reading all sorts of books and listening to all the podcasts, and because I was really excited about it, and it genuinely, like you said, is what gets me excited. But when I really started taking off with businesses is when I started actually acting and creating on the other side. So now my personal kind of, what do you want to call it? My personal mantra is that for every 1 hour of studying that I do, I have to do at least 1 hour of implementation, of acting, doing, action taking, right? And what I found is that, like, and the reason why, since making that pivotal change from just consuming a bunch and until I was like, okay, now I'm ready to go act, you need to start acting earlier than you are ready to do, to be honest. Because what happens is you learn something, like you just said, and then you go implement it, and then you find the obstacle, right? You go find the obstacle quicker that way. And then now you know what you need to overcome. And you go back to the learning room or whatever you want to call it. You go back to the drawing board and learn that new thing that you need to do to overcome that next obstacle, right? And then you just keep doing that and you just get so much further ahead, because no matter what, the obstacles are still going to show up at some point in the journey, no matter how much you've studied about it, right? Because especially in business and entrepreneurship, and I would just also probably say life, like the obstacles come up in a physical format. And so no amount of knowledge is going to help you just all of a sudden do it, right? In most things. I think there's probably some exceptions to that rule. But as an example, like let's take video editing or graphic design or something techie on online these days, right? Like no matter how many YouTube videos or tutorials I watch on how to edit a video, isn't going to make it so that my first time is just super smooth, because as I'm creating that video or that graphic design or that website or whatever it is that I'm learning how to do, you know, you're still going to get to that point where you reach some sort of obstacle and you're going to be like, wait, what? Because you haven't experienced it, right? And it's going to be different for other people too. Like some people are way more experiential learners than they are, which I am for sure. And that might be why I'm saying this and feel this way. And some people are much more like auditory learners or visual learners, right? And so you kind of want to try to understand yourself the best you can to know what type of learner you are, so then you can put yourself in a position to succeed, right, with that type of learning. But that's why I do the 1-for-1 now, because before it was probably like, I spent hundreds of hours just learning and being like, oh, I'm just gonna like, learn all this stuff, and then when I'm finally ready to go and feel confident in my abilities, then I'll start. But then it's like, ah, crap, I still reach an obstacle, like an hour in or whatever. And then it's like, okay, now I got to go back and learn. Where if I would have started that much earlier on in the journey, I feel like I'd probably be further along than I am right now.
Absolutely. And just one thing about that is that putting yourself out there and experiencing these things is that it is very uncomfortable
Oh,
sometimes.
super uncomfortable. Yeah.
But that's where growth is. Like how we were talking about the other day. I refer to Robert Kiyosaki a lot. I've read a good amount of his books. He's talking about anti-fragile. He's like, humans are anti-fragile. We learn from our mistakes, and he's a very big advocate about that concept.
Right.
And, you just you gotta at least put yourself. What I try to do is, like I say to myself every day, there's a price to everything, and the only way to grow is to do something uncomfortable. So I try to do something uncomfortable at least once a day.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, there's a difference between, quality stress and stress that's just not good for you. High cortisol, no growth. So just some type, like, for example, I like to take cold showers sometimes, occasionally ice baths, just something to really put my mind in a space where I know I am consciously choosing these decisions and I'm not just reactive. I'm not just impulsive. Because I used to be very reactive and extremely impulsive.
So good.
And there's
so
no growth at all. And
so good, man.
Like I was just telling you before we started this up, I spent the past 2 days, I still need breaks sometimes. I'm kind of a workaholic. But man, I've just gotten to the point where like I wasn't eating healthy past 2 days. I wasn't, consuming any quality content, and I just feel like a bug, man. And I'm honestly pretty happy that I can keep these conversations going, because like, oh man, it's not worth it. And it really bites me up when I do it. But there's just there's a price to everything. And so it takes a lot of motivation and self-discipline, which you can only teach yourself. No one can give you self-discipline.
Yep.
Just get home and continue the grind. Take little breaks, here and there, but wherever you are looking is where you're heading. Some people never get it, but whatever. It's okay. That's going to get really metaphysical really quickly, so I'm not going to go that way. Yeah, there's just a price to everything. That's probably one of my big mantras. And just, today for tomorrow, which is the real meaning of carpe diem. People interpret it as seize the moment, but it's really actually translated as do it today for the better tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. And gosh, that's so good what you mentioned about like, yeah, you end up where you're headed, and and how you have the control in your hands to be able to do, you know, I think so many people out there, and we kind of are conditioned to have this victim mentality, right? Where we're like, you know, poor us because of XYZ, whatever it is. There's all sorts of reasons why I'm not successful, or I'm destined for failure, whatever, right? Like we tell ourselves these stories. But like, we were born to do something great with our lives, right? Like we were born to turn this life into whatever we want. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, I feel like, is they've gone through life thinking, or just having the experience after experience and evidence after evidence come into their life that like life happens to them and that they don't happen to life. And like you said, where, you know, you take a cold shower because it's just something that you're just like, no, I'm going to tell my brain what to do. I'm not going to let my brain tell me, or my mind dictate everything, right? An example of how I've done this in my life, especially in the last, 12 to 18 months, is my I've got 4 young children, and the oldest 2, the toddlers, are really, really early risers. And if I start my day out by them waking me up ready to go, then I just feel like I'm in complete reaction mode. I'm getting them breakfast and snacks, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm just reacting to my external circumstances, as opposed to um acting myself and choosing the actions that I want to take. So what I did is, like, I'm not a morning person. It's funny because I was on a buddy of mine's podcast last week, and we were talking about how I am not a morning person. He goes, "Yeah, you are not a morning person," because him and I are really good friends, have been for a few years. And it's true. I'm not a morning person at all, but my average wake up time right now is like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, because I want to act on my day. I want my day to start my way. I don't want the world to tell me what's going on. I don't want to open my phone first thing in the morning, see emails and messages, and just get bombarded with the constant barrage of, right, whatever. Like, I want to start my day with stillness and peace, and doing, reading and meditating and getting into a good headspace myself, do a few stretches and calisthenics exercises, whatever, to kind of get the heart pumping, blood pumping a little bit, right? I just, and even at, like, one of my coaches that I hired last year, he really got me into this. And he was the one that was like, you know, like, I know you're not a morning person, but trust me, like, it's going to make a world of a difference. So I reluctantly gave it a shot, and it's crazy. Like, at this point, like, I woke up at 5:30 a.m. this morning. That was sleeping in for me, because the night before, not last night, the night before, I went to bed at 12 and woke up at 3. And so I got 3 hours of sleep and still did a full day's work, right? And you were on the call last night. Go till for me, it's not, 9:30, which is pretty early for most people, but I was, in bed by 9:30, woke up at 5:30, and that was sleeping in for me. I still was able to, come down to my office and get in my state for the day, and kind of get primed up for the day. And then it's just crazy. I'm in a better mood. Like, I'm attract just more abundance into my life. Like, it's just crazy, And so, like what you said about just finding little decisions that you can make that put you in control of your mind, not your mind in control of you, like your emotions in control of you. That's huge. That's a little actionable hack for anybody listening to this right now, that you can absolutely start doing today, tomorrow, whenever. Start as fast as you can to start training your brain, because it's going to take some untraining and then retraining, right? It doesn't happen overnight. Change does not happen in a week. It doesn't happen in 3 months. It happens over a sustained period of time, right? I think when I first started learning about personal development, I mean, I was in college. I was a broke college kid, right? I mean, we're talking seriously no money, essentially, right? And it wasn't until probably at least 2 or 3 years later, to where all the personal development work that I had been working on myself those last 2 to 3 years actually started showing up in a in a monetary sense, right? There's a ton of growth happening along the way with happiness and peace and all that kind of stuff. But from a monetary perspective, which is what a lot of people get into personal development wanting, is they're like, okay, I need to up level my self in order to make more money, which is that's noble, that's whatever, right? Like, but it doesn't happen overnight, and it builds up like a snowball, right? Like a snowball coming down the mountain. And like you mentioned, as far as having friends and family members who just are not, they're going to shoot you down along the way, right? Like in that book that I mentioned earlier, the crabs in the bucket phenomenon, right? Where, you know,
That stuck to me. Absolutely.
yeah, crabs go into a bucket and they're the most agile creatures in the sea. They can scale up any wall and they can get out of virtually any danger, but for some reason they get caught by the bucketful, right? And that's because all a crabber or a fisherman or whatever, someone who's crabbing, needs to do is put a little piece of bait in the bottom of the bucket. They all fall into the trap, and then the top is open, right? Like they could freely leave, but once one crab starts to go, the other crabs don't want it to leave, so they claw it down, and they'll even kill the crab if they're trying to leave the pack, you know what I mean, and trying to escape the trap. And humans are similar to crabs in that sense, right? And so I remember distinctly, it's funny because my wife and I, we were talking about this, that when we were newly married, she knew that I was really into the whole personal development stuff, and being stressed about finances as a young couple. um there was definitely some heated discussions where she was like, why do you even spend all that time reading all those books and doing all that stuff? Like, it doesn't even do anything for us. Like, we're still broke, right? And I remember distinctly, one time sitting on the floor of our bedroom, just like, you know, super upset because I was like, she just doesn't get it. And she's like, the closest person to me, right? And um, looking back now, we were talking about this and kind of laughing about, she was like, man, how wrong I was, um, and I'm glad that, not that I was trying to prove her wrong. I was trying to do it for other reasons, but essentially I proved her wrong, that like, hey, look, like, this is why I'm doing this. And so now that it's like paid off, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's really hard for sometimes people to stick with changing and developing personally because they don't see the results right away. But it's kind of like that cliche saying is like, you really need to learn to love the journey and the process more than the outcomes and results, right? And that's with this whole consuming and creating and personal development and learning and up leveling yourself as an individual. That's huge to know, is that this is an ongoing process and it never ends, or it should never end, if you want to continue to live your best quality of life and feel the best that you could possibly feel, right? So
Absolutely. Just to throw it out there real quick, is like everything begins with momentum. Like, and it all starts with the littlest push. Like, you can't quite jump right into hours grinding and expect it to do it from then on there. It takes conditioning. Like,
yeah,
literally begin by just getting up in the morning, drinking a cup of water, and making your bed, and
yeah,
doing that every single day. Even if you don't do it every single day of the week, consciously choose to at least try to force yourself to get up and do some type of proactive thing. And it
yeah,
compounds and it builds. And soon you won't even have to try. It's just a part of your self identity and you're doing it. And it's painful to not do it after a certain point.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
But
exactly. Because it becomes so ingrained in who you are, and those neural pathways that we talked about earlier, those mirror neurons, like they start to fire and wire together, right? To where now it's like your brain is like, oh wow, like I'm starting to really like this, I'm starting to really like the way this feels. There's one of Tony Robbins' top psychologists. I think you were at probably a similar event that I've been to, where this guy spoke and he talked about how to condition your brain, right? And so there's like our whatever, it's like parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system, that's like our, like the most powerful system in our bodies. And you know, he talks about how like, okay, if you want to train yourself to do something, like what does a baby do when it's first learning to walk? Like, funny enough, one of my twins is just learning to walk. And, you know, when she took her first step, like we, you know, my wife and I were like, oh my gosh, you know, good job. You know, you're doing so good. And their faces light up and they get excited and they don't know what they just did. All they know is that they feel really good that they made their parents happy and that they got cheered on, and there's excitement going on. And that's what's going on in your sympathetic or parasympathetic, whatever system it is. And so, you know, in order to train yourself and condition yourself, like you mentioned, to do that, he talks about like an actionable thing that you can do is like write down something that like is something negative in your life that you want to change. Write down the antithesis of that. So the positive of that, turn it into a positive. And then every time you do that positive thing that's combating the negative habit that you're trying to get rid of, like reward yourself or pat yourself on the back. Or, you know, he says, you know, if you squeeze your fist and you put a big smile on your face and you say, yes, you know, shout yes. Like, even if you look like a total weirdo, what you're doing is you're lighting up that sympathetic nervous system that's giving your brain, as a baby does when it takes its first steps, saying, okay, like, I don't know what I just did, but all I know is that I got cheered on for doing it. So now I'm going to do it again. And then I'm going to get cheered on again. And I'm going to do it again. Right. I think it's really important for us to reward ourselves for the little steps that we take in our path towards changing. And it doesn't have to be like a reward that like costs money. Like everybody's always like, oh yeah, I'm going to like buy myself this thing. And if that's what lights you up, then great. But like literally all it can be is like, go stare at yourself in the mirror, look yourself in the eyes and smile at yourself and be like, you are a freaking badass. Like just doing that alone is like, you know, I've done weird kooky stuff like that all the time in my personal development journey. Like I'll take a video of myself talking to myself and then I'll listen to it. You know what I mean? Like it's weird stuff, but then it gets me excited. Like it's funny, it's weird, it gets me laughing and smiling. And those are all emotions that when you put that emotion into the learning and the change, it can happen so much faster. And that conditioning can really start to take root. And that's how you fire and wire those new neurons in your brain and undo the negative stuff. So
absolutely, you know,
yeah.
and I don't know if it's the exact word for it, but something very similar to that is just gratitude, you know, just
Oh,
being
big
grateful
time.
for what you have now. Because like, you know, before you can really like get up and make your bed, I mean, sometimes you can do it when you're stressed out, but it all really starts in, you know, your mind space. And I think the beginning start for that is just simply gratitude. Just
Yeah.
one little, you know, that will change
Huge.
your entire life. I
Huge.
honestly, that's the beginning of the snowball. Not gonna lie.
Oh, big time. Big time. Yeah. Like it's crazy. So I lived in a third world country for a few years and I met people that, I mean, they lived in adobe clay huts, you know, like they lived in not the best circumstances. And I saw people that didn't even have a bathroom in their house. Like they had to use like a community bathroom, stuff that we wouldn't even imagine, no matter our circumstances here in the United States. Let's face it, no matter how poor you are in the United States, you're not living in a mud hut without a bathroom. You know what I mean? And granted, some people could say, argue like homeless and this and that. And yes, I understand there are some very tragic circumstances out there, but the majority of people don't have to live like that. But they were some of the happiest people I've ever met. And I was like, this is crazy. And then being down there for multiple years, you know, I was just like, man, these people are, you know, these people are just warm and inviting and they're nice and they just, you know, they, it's, you know, it's crazy. And then here we are sometimes pissed off because we're late for work or we're in traffic or something happened, somebody cut us off, like just you know, small. Like there's that like funny saying that's like, oh, first world problems, but it's like it's actually true, right? And that gratitude is something that can totally combat that and put us on, you know, a different wavelength, a different brain wavelength, right? Like I think Tony Robbins, he talks about, you know, fear and gratitude cannot coexist, right? Scarcity and gratitude can't coexist. So if you want to have more abundance and attract more abundance in your life, like get more grateful, you know? And so anyways, just kind of
Yeah.
cool.
You know, I don't want to get too metaphysical on these podcasts, but just from personal experience, I've come to find that like weird things tend to happen in your favor if you're genuinely grateful. Just
Yeah.
genuinely like trying to put on a smile or be a positive influence, even if you're not feeling the best.
Yeah.
And me experiencing that and me kind of like realizing that after a couple months and just realizing how like I can't remember exactly what was happening, but things were happening in my favor that were like, I don't know, it's hard to describe. I'm not going to get too much into it. Just highly recommend you try it. I'm sure you might experience it. Um, but just the hubris that can come along with thinking, once you start to get moving, hubris is pretty much like I'm the shit. I know everything. I'm top dog. When in reality, it's ignorance, and that can spawn once you get like a little taste of success. And
Yeah.
I think hubris is typically like when you see like the yin yang or ebb and flow. Hubris is the peak of your
Yeah.
top, and that's
Yeah.
usually what leads to that freaking bear
Dis-
market.
yeah. Destruction.
You know what I mean? So you got
Yeah.
to be really careful. And I think I've come to find like the fine line in between all that. I still try to refine it, but it's definitely come more of a constant in my life. Is another word that I really like, sophrosity. So it does not roll off the tongue, but it's got a beautiful meaning.
What's the word?
Sophrosity.
Sophrosity. Interesting. I've never heard that word before.
It does not roll off the tongue, but the meaning of it is great. It's pretty much being humble, but knowing your worth. Even if your worth is grand in your mind, it's
Hmm.
constantly being humble and relatable. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? A teacher of knowledge, you know what I mean? And just constantly giving, not putting
Yeah.
yourself anywhere higher, never trying to prove yourself.
Yeah.
And with those fine lines of constantly trying to keep myself in that headspace, because I have been hubris before a few times and they're horrible. I have been the opposite of hubris, you know what I mean? But sophrosity
Yeah.
is just balance,
Yeah.
constant balance. No matter what's happening, high, low, you're just grateful, humble, giving, and things are going to be good no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really glad that you said that, man. And it's actually probably we didn't even plan this, but like literally what you just said leads into kind of the next part of the unicorn equation, which we talk about becoming a servant to others, right? And not a servant in the sense of like a peasant, but like literally serving other people. And like what you just said, where it's like you're humble but not arrogant, or what was it?
Humble, but yeah, not arrogant, pretty
Yeah,
much.
yeah,
I mean,
reciprocity.
it's
I'll have to go look that up because but anyways, yeah, like the next portion of the unicorn equation, which is can happen simultaneously as you're doing step two. Step number one of kind of the wealth creation process is building out your own reputation as somebody who can generate results by serving other people. And the reason why I've kind of phrased it this way is because I don't want to pigeonhole myself into saying, oh, you have to be an entrepreneur, because there's a lot of employees that build that reputational currency of, holy moly, this person totally knows what they're doing and is serving the business or serving the company in such a way that they deserve to be compensated more. And that's so that's one of the ways that you can do it. Or you can do it through what I believe is the most important thing is to, yeah, like if you want to be an entrepreneur, like serve others to your highest capacity and deliver value to them by serving them. And that's like super foundational, is building that reputation of somebody who can generate positive results for another human being. And so anyways, sophrosity, I'm definitely going to go look that up. But want to thank everybody for tuning in to this week's podcast. It was awesome having Kalob on, and be looking for the next future episodes as they continue to drop. We'll have Kalob be our co-host, as well as bringing other guests onto the show and doing some solo episodes and everything. But make sure and subscribe, download this, whatever it is, click the button, because we're going to be delivering content that is actionable and valuable to your life so that you can create whatever it is that you're trying to create, whether it be your dream life or just what I like to call the GOAT life, right? Your greatest life of all time, individually, as all of us as individuals. So tune in, appreciate you, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Later, everybody.